What is the difference between these two satellite images of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco? One is taken with an optical satellite and one with a radar satellite called Synthetic Aperture Radar, or in short, SAR. SAR satellites can take images in the dark, see through clouds, smoke, and fog, and their resolution is independent of how far the satellite is from Earth. Compared to the optical image, the SAR image looks pretty weird. For example, we see 3 distinct bridge reflections, and the 2 additional reflections don't seem to be shadows because they're very bright. Actually, every such weirdness in the SAR image has a physical interpretation behind it. And in this video, we'll see exactly how these reflections are formed, starting with how a SAR satellite takes images in so-called Stripmap mode, why raw SAR data lives in time, not in space, and how we can use these 3 reflections to measure the distance between the water and the bridge. So let's get into it and see what radar sees. Let's first look at the satellite that took our image. This is a SAR satellite with a deployable mesh-based antenna. The key components are the mesh reflector and the feed assembly, which sends out microwaves that are then reflected on the mesh and travel towards Earth. Vice versa, incoming microwaves illuminate the mesh and are recorded by the feed assembly. On top, the mesh is held in place by a net, and next to it there's a solar array, which powers the feed assembly and some other utilities to move the satellite in space, send data to other satellites or down to Earth, and receive commands for tasking images. The SAR satellite takes images by sending out pulses of microwaves to Earth and recording the echo. A SAR satellite always looks from the side and can take images in different modes. Our image of the bridge was taken by sending out pulses at a fixed angle. This way, our image becomes a long strip, and fittingly, this acquisition type is called Stripmap. When dealing with Stripmap images, we don't view directions in a global coordinate system defined by latitude and longitude. Instead, the coordinates are defined relative to the satellite's movement. In SAR terminology, the flight direction of the satellite is called azimuth, and the direction perpendicular to it is called range, because this direction measures how far the microwaves travel or range. And there's another significant difference to optical images. Each pixel in a SAR image actually belongs to a specific time interval. For example, the pixel in azimuth is only filled up once the satellite has already flown past its location in the real world. For interpreting a SAR image, it's useful to imagine the image being filled up column by column over time, with the pixels closest to the satellite being populated first. We will later see that in reality things are a bit more complicated, but this simplification is a great tool for interpreting SAR imagery. Now, to explain our triple bridge reflection, let's look at how we determine the range of a signal given a fixed azimuth coordinate. The antenna transmits a pulse and records the backscatter, which is the tiny portion of the echo that arrives back at our antenna. If the backscatter strength is weak, we form a black pixel. If it is strong, we form a white pixel. In reality, we have many pixels. So how do we know which backscatter belongs to which range cell? Let's make things a bit simpler and assume we only have 3 range cells. The range cells are filled up based on the time it takes the signal to travel to a specific geolocation and back. Given the position of a satellite, we can compute this time based on the so-called slant range, which is the shortest distance between our satellite and a specific ground location. For example, a signal that returns from the closest point of our area to be imaged in range, the so-called near range, arrives back at the antenna at 2 times R1 divided by the speed of the microwave, the speed of light. In the same fashion, signals from mid-range arrive back at 2 times R2 divided by the speed of light, and signals from far range arrive back at 2 times R3 divided by the speed of light. An interesting thing now happens if we have an object on the ground, such as a tree, so that 2 signals, which intuitively we would like to assign to different pixels, arrive back at the antenna at the same time. In this case, the near-range pixel becomes superimposed and not only carries the original signal, but also the backscatter from the tree. Let's assume we obtain no backscatter from the near range location, so our pixel is black. From the tree, we receive some stronger backscatter and our pixel is almost white. But because the signal arrives at the same time as the signals from the near range, it's also mapped to the near range, so that the near range pixel becomes white and the mid-range pixel becomes black. This is a very strong simplification because trees actually wouldn't produce fully white pixels, but this is a nice example to see that each pixel in a SAR image is connected to a time of arrival of a signal, and there's no one-to-one mapping to a specific geolocation. Now let's move closer to our bridge example and imagine we're imaging water. If our SAR is sufficiently side-looking and the water is calm, the water acts like a mirror, so that all signals are reflected away from our antenna. Instead of the entire wavefront, we can also visualize single rays, and we immediately see that no backscatter arrives back at our antenna, so our pixels are completely black. So how does the backscatter change when we now add the bridge to the scene? To simplify things, we will only look at the road surface of the bridge. An incoming signal can be reflected in 3 ways. First, it can bounce off the road surface and travel directly back to the antenna. This is a single bounce reflection. It can also bounce off the road surface, travel to the water, and then back to the antenna. This is a double bounce. Finally, the signal can first bounce off the water, reflect on the road surface, back to the water, and then back to our antenna. And as you might have guessed, this is a triple bounce. Now let's remember that incoming signals are mapped to pixel locations based on the time they arrive at the antenna. So let's use this principle to assign the backscatter of each of our bounces to a pixel location. We send out our signals at the same time, and after a short initial waiting time, fill up the pixels within 1 second increments. We first have to wait a bit until the first signal arrives back at our sensor, and then things will go pretty quickly. At 7 seconds, we have no signal, single bounce, no signal, double bounce, no signal, triple bounce, no signal. So in total, our bridge creates 3 different reflections, which are exactly the ones we see in the SAR image. The top bridge comes from the single bounce, the middle bridge comes from the double bounce, and the bottom bridge comes from the triple bounce reflection. So using this knowledge, can you tell from which side the satellite was taking the image? Feel free to pause the video and think about it for a couple of seconds. It's the side from which we first see the single, then the double, and then the triple bounce reflection. And there's even more information we can obtain from these reflections. For example, to compute the distance between the water and the road surface, the so-called clearance of the bridge. Let's compute the clearance using the single and double bounce and some very simple trigonometry. First, we know the angle between a perpendicular to the surface and the signals before reflection. This angle is called the incidence angle theta, and we can compute it from the position of our satellite. Because the distance between the satellite and our area of interest is very large, all signals before reflection hit the objects on the ground with the incidence angle, and we can view them as approximately parallel. If you want to know more details about this assumption, check out the description box. To compute the clearance, we can use the fact that there always exists a virtual scatterer which produces a single bounce with the same traveling wave path as our double bounce. Obtaining the angles of our actual double bounce path requires some heavy lifting, and we much rather work with the path defined by the virtual scatterer because this one only involves a single angle, the incidence angle. Now let's call the path induced by our virtual scatterer our virtual double bounce. And let's use it to compute the difference in ranges between the single bounce and the virtual double bounce path. We can do this by dropping a perpendicular from the single bounce path at the edge of the road surface to the virtual double bounce path. Now we have a right angle triangle, so you might already suspect what our next step is. We can use the rule of cosine for right angle triangles, which states that the cosine of theta is equal to the length of the adjacent divided by the length of the hypotenuse. And in our case, this is the difference in ranges between the double and single bounce divided by the clearance h. As a last step, let's rearrange our equation so we get that the clearance h is equal to the difference in ranges between the double and single bounce divided by the cosine of the incidence angle. And now remember that we can compute this during the day, night, and even if our bridge is covered in smoke, clouds, or fog. This is really an astonishing capability of SAR. Now, if we go back to our rows and columns view of the SAR image, we might be tempted to think that we can also determine the azimuth position of a signal by the time of arrival. But if we try this, we will pretty quickly run into some problems. To visualize this, let's draw up two graphs, one in the time and one in the spatial domain. In the time domain, we have slow time on the x-axis. You can think of slow time as the time at which the platform is at a particular along track or azimuth location. On the y-axis, we plot the time it takes for a signal to travel back to the antenna. This is called fast time, and it's proportional to the range. And to keep things simple, let's ignore the altitude of the satellite. In our spatial graph, we have the data acquisition geometry, so to say, our real-world geometry, which our SAR image should mimic as closely as possible. On the x-axis, we have the along-track position of our platform, which is the same as the azimuth direction. And on the y-axis, we measure the direction perpendicular to it, which is called a cross-track. The main difference between the two graphs is that on the left side, we are measuring the raw SAR data, so how the SAR data arrives at our sensor without any pre-processing. And this is measured in time, slow time on the x-axis and fast time on the y-axis. On the right-hand graph, we measure spatial coordinates, and one of the main challenges in SAR is to translate what we have in the left coordinate system back into something that mimics as closely as possible what we have in the right-hand coordinate system. So, to travel from time to spatial coordinates, this is called image formation. Let's now have a look at how a position in the data acquisition geometry translates to a point in slow and fast time. Let's add a small point scatterer, such as a card, to the data acquisition geometry. Our platform is currently fixed at its starting position. How long would it take a signal to travel from the platform to the point scatterer and back? We can compute this time with simple trigonometry. Notice that we can form a right-angle triangle with the blue and red legs. Applying the Pythagorean theorem delivers the distance. To convert this into a time, we first have to multiply by 2 because the signal performs a round trip, and then divide by the speed of the microwave, which is the speed of light, c. Plugging in the values to this equation, we can insert the travel time on our left-hand graph. How does the return time change as our satellite moves along track? The distance to the point scatterer first becomes smaller and then larger again, so then we obtain a hyperbola. The key information here is that the beam footprint on the ground is so wide that a single point scatterer will contribute to several slow time points. Now let's add a point scatterer that is a bit closer in the across-track direction. And we see it also creates a hyperbola, which is even more bold. To make things even more realistic, let's add even more point scatterers. And we immediately see the problem. The return signals from different point scatterers overlap both in fast and slow time. And from the raw data in the time domain, we cannot see at all what kind of objects exist in our data acquisition geometry. And this is also the case in the real data. Here is the raw SAR data from the image we've been looking at so far. As expected, it's really unfocused and smeared, and really looks like it's taken by a moving platform. To get an interpretable image, we can project the image to so-called zero Doppler coordinates using something like the range migration algorithm or back projection. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like a more detailed video about such image formation algorithms. If you liked this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, check out the description for more resources, a Python notebook about visualizing SAR images in the time domain, and the source code for this video. If you want to learn more about the wavelengths used in SAR, check out the previous video on SAR bands. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video, where we'll see what radar sees.